All right, I am back with This Week at Tassi, my weekly news roundup. Interesting stories this week, including some pretty big ones, I would say. The biggest launch of the week was the Battlefield Open Beta, the Battlefield 6 Open Beta. Really, really impressive numbers. This was, you did have to have a key for this, but it reflects the interest that we've seen over the course of the past, at least especially a couple months, where we've seen the big reveal trailer that everyone thought looked cool, and then we saw the multiplayer trailer, which everyone mostly thought looked cool, and now everyone is getting their hands on the game. This did really big numbers. I think it was either 324 or 334,000 peak concurrent players on Steam. It was decently high on the PlayStation charts last I saw. Just a really massive launch, and that is actually with some trouble for people getting in and server capacity and all that stuff. And all of that implies that, the kind of refrain I've heard for Battlefield 6 after all this time has been all these reveals is we're back. Like everyone keeps saying that. And generally speaking, from what I'm hearing about the open beta, everyone is very much liking it. I have not played myself yet. I have more than a bunch of work to catch up with in terms of writing, but it's the sentiments and the people I know playing say that it's really a callback to when the series was better. Obviously, we're skipping over 2042, which had less than a good launch, and it had some overhauls and things, but the destruction is being praised to high heaven. It is the craziest destruction I think I've seen in a modern game. The finals did a pretty good job of that too. I love the finals. It's such a creative game, but to see Battlefield have at least similar kind of destruction in that level that's been an upgrade over past games is very cool. A question now turns to how competitive is Battlefield 6 going to be against Call of Duty Black Ops 7 this fall? There's, been this eternal rivalry to some extent between Battlefield and Call of Duty, given that they're both modern military, well, sometimes World War II or I shooters that are just constantly in competition. That's been, less so lately, given there's some years off and then there's 2042. But now, Battlefield's going to be kind of roaring back here. And there's a quote about, from, I forget, it was his Activision leadership about how they're not super worried about, or no, this was an inside report of what Activision people were saying. And it was about how they believe internally that Call of Duty is too big to fail, and they're not super worried about Battlefield 6, albeit they're keeping an eye on it. I would still be impressed if Battlefield 6 managed to top Black Ops 7 or come super close to that. I definitely understand all the hype online and these initial player numbers and stuff, but Call of Duty is a tough nut to crack. It's also a Black Ops year, which people generally seem to like. Black Ops 7 does look pretty good, but Call of Duty has a number of things working against it, in that I think a lot of people are thinking that it's pretty stale in a lot of ways. And, we're at Black Ops 7 here, so as we can see, not exactly a new experience at this point. There's, people are very tired of cheaters in Call of Duty. I've seen a lot of people leave the game just entirely because of cheaters. There's this big cosmetic thing where, they're selling increasingly ridiculous skins over the years, and we've ended up on Beavis and Butthead and American Dad skins, something Battlefield 6 says they're not going to do as a modern military shooter in their microtransactions. So it's certainly going to be a more competitive year than we've seen in almost a decade between these two series. But, Call of Duty does not lose the throne unless a Rockstar game comes out or the giant Hogwarts Legacy. That was a bit of a surprise still, but I'd love to see it. I think Call of Duty needs a shake-up and needs some real competition to evolve. So we'll see if that happens here, but the beta player numbers are huge. The other big story that was in the last 24 hours is Sony had an earnings call, and we didn't need any insider reports on this, but they talked very frankly about Bungie and the future plans for Bungie, both in terms of Destiny and Marathon, but mostly kind of how the studio operates. And the headline here is that Bungie is going to continue to kind of like lose some of its independence and then be folded further into the umbrella of PlayStation Studios rather than sort of operating on as this independent entity. Bungie made a big deal about how even though they were bought for $3.6 billion for Sony, they retained a lot of, they retained independence. They were still like an independent studio to make their own decisions, do their own things. And, that is not super panned out over time. Destiny has always been, it's a little tough to know exactly how profitable Destiny has been. Sony did say that Destiny, the show, and Helldivers make up 40% of their revenue or something. Like, so that is their live service stuff, and Destiny's being included there as in Destiny's not losing money. I think this was in the Final Shape era, but obviously, kind of post-Final Shape launch, things have been tougher, and it seems like they're going to be tougher for the foreseeable future. We've seen all-time low player counts with Destiny. We had an expansion just launched that had one-third of the Final Shape, and like even if that wasn't, given the size of it, if that's not unexpected, it's still reality. And then we have a whole bunch of Marathon problems where there was a whole lot riding on Marathon. Sony reiterated that they think it's still coming out before March 2026. But like if it's not, they said they might have to reevaluate the launch. Some people took that to mean the whole launch, but I think it just means that date. I don't think there's any chance Marathon gets canceled regardless of how good or bad it ends up being. But I guess we'll see. And the idea here is that Sony leadership will have a more active role here in terms of like what Sony does or what Bungie does and the things they make and what they focus on. I know a lot of people are excited that, Sony may make better decisions than Bungie leadership, and Bungie leadership has been generally very bad outside of maybe some of the people who left, like Joe Blackburn. And it's up in the air. Like what's going to happen now is the executives are going to peace out after whatever part of their deal with Sony goes through, and they're going to leave with millions of dollars. It's going to be a good amount of executives, and then Sony will kind of slot their own people in there, I imagine. And we'll see. Sony's not exactly known for being adept at running live service games under the Sony Studios brand, so I obviously hope it improves, but I don't think that's necessarily a guarantee here. So we'll see what happens. I think it's especially going to escalate after the Marathon launch, and we'll see what happens there. One interesting rumor that was going around this past week is that a very, very accurate leaker who's predicted a bunch of things that were going to happen at Xbox and that were announced and are going to happen at Xbox is that Starfield will finally be coming to PS5 at some point relatively soon. This is kind of, at least in the current form of Xbox, like one of the last bastions of Xbox exclusivity, to the point where they had it in their Activision court case that Starfield is exactly the type of game that will not make exclusive, or that we will make exclusive because it's a new IP. It's not something like Call of Duty or Diablo or whatever that's already multi-platform. So like this is something that we keep to ourselves, but not Call of Duty. Well, here we are. It's been a few years. Things changed. Xbox is releasing games everywhere. So that is going to be next. That's not the weirdest news. The weirdest news is a part of this where they say they're going to release a new expansion alongside this, where I'm stunned they're still making expansions for Starfield, especially when it should be like all hands on deck for Elder Scrolls 6. I liked the base game of Starfield more than most. I did not like the expansion, Shattered Space. I do not think it was good. And they're making another one. That seems a little odd, but it's not just like I didn't think it was good. The player bump that the expansion got for Starfield was like non-existent. It was like, if you look at the charts, it's like the tiniest little bump you've ever seen. So I don't know why they really thought it was a good idea to release another one. Maybe the idea is that it will help boost Sony sales or get Xbox players back into the game too, but that seems very strange to me. This is just a game I thought they'd kind of move on from at this point. The PS5 release seemed inevitable, I'll give it that, but I would be surprised if they just continued development here. Granted, they did that with something like Fallout 76, but that is an MMO, and they do want online, ongoing content for that, where Starfield is a single player, one and done game. So I don't know. I would expect barely anyone, barely any old Starfield players to play a new expansion. I don't even know if I'll bother, honestly, depending on what's out at that time. But really, really stunned at that news, honestly. So we don't have a date on that. I think it was 2026 sometime. I mean, I fully believe it's happening. I don't know the exact details, but we'll see. So we'll probably see some sort of announcement there over the next couple of months or something. But yeah, Nintendo, Nintendo has raised prices on the Switch in a lot of regions. The original Switch, and then some pieces of Switch 2 related hardware. Once again, like Xbox, they are citing current market conditions in terms of why they're raising prices. This is a super old console at this point. This is a 7-8-year-old system where you don't see prices go up on those systems very often over time. And they just launched the Switch 2, and you're raising prices on the Switch 1. But like, yeah, market conditions are bad because, obviously the Trump administration keeps imposing tariffs on a bazillion countries and different products. And in this case, China, Cambodia, and Vietnam are places that make and supply components to make the Switch, similar for PlayStation. PlayStation, but also Xbox, all the consoles. And those have they had huge tariffs. They got reduced. Now the tariffs are pretty big again. So Nintendo's like, screw it, we got to raise prices. That joins Microsoft, who also raised prices like an absurd degree. Like Microsoft jacked the prices up anywhere from like $50 to $130 or something, whereas the Switch is more like a $50 increase or something for the Switch. They say they do not rule out raising prices on the Switch 2, which launched at $450, through $150 more than the original Switch launched at. And that's probably, if that happens, it's probably going to be another 50. I can see that happening, especially where they might think they're able to afford that, especially because the Switch 2 is the fastest selling piece of video game hardware of all time. So site market conditions, charge an extra $50, rake in more cash. PlayStation is the only console manufacturer that has not raised prices yet. I still feel like they're probably going to if these tariffs remain in place. Maybe they're just trying to wait out the tariffs and see if once again, the administration just throws up their hands and like, screw it, we're reducing tariffs. They did some deal with us, or pretend they did some deal with us or whatever. But it does feel somewhat inevitable if that continues. I don't know if PlayStation wants to keep taking big losses on that. Finally, this just happened within the last 24 hours. Microsoft canceled Contraband, which is a game that exists that most people may have forgotten about. This is by Avalanche, the studio that announced this game back in 2021. Contraband was going to be some sort of open world heist treasure hunting game. All we got was this like sort of cinematic trailer again back in 2021. And we can blame Microsoft for canceling higher profile projects. Like, I can't believe they sunk that much into Perfect Dark and they showed it off and like they canceled that. This game did not show a single pixel of anything since 2021. No gameplay, no other news, nothing. And reportedly they wanted more time and money. At a certain point, you can't always blame corporate, and sometimes the studio's bad. We don't know the exact details of what happened here, but if you're working on a game for that long and show effectively nothing from it since, years and years and years ago, if you're getting canceled, it's not the biggest surprise in the world. I'm also reminded of Fair Games over at PlayStation, which had a cinematic trailer years ago, and we've seen or heard nothing from that game other than the founder of the studio, Jade Raymond, left. So I think that game's getting canceled, so we'll see. Microsoft has canceled a ton of stuff in their recent round of layoffs, but this one, which came after the fact, might be the least surprising given the context of that game. That said, it's another one to add to the list of games Microsoft couldn't manage to get its studios to assemble, even with a bunch of time, bunch of resources. So that's not great. Not that we don't see that with Sony and its canceled live service games and things like that, but it's certainly happening to Microsoft more often than not. So not great, but maybe not the most surprising. That's the news stories for the week. I am currently grinding Destiny Solstice when I have time because they made that an insanely profitable event for players. I was going to do a whole video on that, but I wasn't able to. So yeah, we'll see how long that lasts. Allegedly, it's on purpose, and we're just supposed to be getting all this loot. But yeah. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.